Hopeful Brewing. My name is Victor. Thanks for joining my channel. This is my first YouTube video I've made. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're making a style that I've never made before. Today, we're making a German Pils, but we're making it with a twist. German Pils, but instead of lager yeast, we're going to use Kveik yeast. So I guess it's not really a traditional German Pils. Why are we going to choose Kveik yeast over traditional lager yeast? And the main reason is Kveik ferments very quickly. It ferments a lot faster than lager yeast, and quite frankly, I'm impatient. So that's why we're going to use it. So what is Kveik yeast anyways? So Kveik yeast is an ancient Norwegian yeast strain that is traditionally used to produce farmhouse beer. These Nordic yeast strains have been around for hundreds of years, but recently they've taken both the professional brewing world and the home brewing world by storm. So this group of yeast became popular starting around 2019 or so. And you can find a lot of different articles on this strain and how it became popular. Suggest to do a little bit of research on it before using it. But the main reason why we really like Kveik yeast is because we can ferment it at very, very warm temperatures. So typically, most lager yeasts are routinely fermented at around 40 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And most ale yeasts are fermented somewhere between 55 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Kveik yeast, it's very common to ferment all the way up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So this, the typical range is somewhere between 80 and 100 degrees. And this leads us to very fast fermentation times. So I just finished fermenting a seltzer using a clean strain of Kveik in less than 48 hours. So the turnaround time is much quicker, and we're able to hit these very high temperatures without producing these undesirable off flavors. So that's the main reason why we're using it. So let's talk about the German Pils style a little bit. So I'm not going to bore you with all of the details to this in the style guidelines, but for those who are interested, the German Pils style is style 5D in the BJCP 2015 guide. And you can look up all the specifics here in this guide and tell you everything that you need to know about this style. But I just want to talk a little bit more about the highlights of this style rather than bore you with all the details. So this is a traditional German style beer, and you could say it's maybe an adaptation of the Bohemian or Czech Pilsner style of beers. Generally, it's called German Pils versus German Pilsner. It's going to be a pale beer. It's going to be generally even to bitter in terms of balance. And there's going to be mild to moderately strong hoppy character using traditional German hops such as Tettinger, Hallertau, Pearl, or Hersbrucker. Generally, you're going to have 100% or close to 100% Pilsner malt, and you're going to use some type of traditional German lager yeast. So this leads me to where I switch things up, and that's because of how long lagering takes. Now, without getting too complicated, lagering is a process of cold storing or cold aging beer. So during lagering, it slowly dissipates carbon dioxide and scrubs several unpleasant tasting compounds out of the beer, which includes sulfur dioxide, which can contribute green beer flavors, those vegetable notes that you don't want. So this often leads you to those skunk-like off aromas, especially in beer exposed to light. So that's why lagering has traditionally taken place. Now, I recently listened to a podcast on the Brewing Network called The Session, and their guest was Wayfinder Beer, who specializes in lager style beers. So Kevin was on, and he said that in particular, Helles beers, they were taught in German brewing school to lager those beers a week plus one for each degree of Plato. So this means that they could lager somewhere 11 to 13 weeks is pretty common. So he went on to state that he doesn't typically follow this methodology and typically only lagers for about 4 weeks. Now, regardless, I'm not going to wait multiple weeks for a beer to lager, and that's why Kveik was selected here. It's our time saver. Now, in fact, I've never even done any other type of lager beer before, so this is a complete venture for me, and this Kveik is what allows us to do this. Now, there's a number of different varieties of Kveik strains out there. Almost every yeast manufacturer produces, a number of different ones. So the ones that you're going to want to use for a Pilsner or a lager-esque type of beer is going to be anything that is clean fermenting. So a couple of recommendations out there. You could use Loki from Imperial Yeast. You could use Oslo from Bootleg Biology. White Labs probably has something, but the one that we really used is Lutra from Omega Yeast. And this strain is supposedly, one that's very, very clean fermenting. So we're going to give this one a shot. Okay, so let's get into the recipe here. Now, I recently switched over to Brewer's Friend for my brewing software. I used to use something called Brewer's Assistant on Android. Not very good. So Brewer's Friend is a great website, and they have free versions as well as a paid version. The only reason why I really switched to a paid version was I have a Tilt wireless hydrometer, and the integration into this will keep track and log the fermentation on the recipes itself. So I wanted that feature, and you have to upgrade for that feature. So I suggest you check out Brewer's Friend. Obviously, there's lots of other brewing software that's popular out there, like Beersmith, and a number of others. So traditionally, German Pils is going to be almost all German Pilsner malt. I added a little bit of Victory malt just to try to round out, add a little bit more complexity, maybe a little bit of biscuity flavor into it. But if I did it again, I'd probably leave it out, to be honest. So if you want that extra little complexity, Victory malt might be good for you to use. Otherwise, you can leave it out and just use 100% Pilsner malt. So let's get into the hopping schedule. I had planned on using just all Hallertau, but the Hallertau that was available at the brew shop I go to, Windsor Homebrew, which if you're in Orange County, I highly suggest checking them out, was Hallertau, and it was only 2.8% alpha acid rather than what I thought it was going to be closer to 5. So I had to improvise, and rather than buy, a ton of Hallertau to get the alpha acid needed to get to about the 35 IBUs I wanted, because I didn't want all of that hop material in the boil kettle, I just decided to use a little bit of Cascade, which I just had on hand, about a ½ ounce of Cascade. If I were to do it again, I'd probably leave out the Cascade and use some other type of a little bit higher alpha acid, traditional German hop, maybe Pearl or something like that. So anyway, we're shooting for about 35 IBUs, with most of the IBUs coming from an addition at 60 minutes from the boil. And then I layered in a little bit more, with about 10 minutes left and at flame out. So that's what my suggestion would be. Although, like I said, I recently listened to a Brewing Network podcast with Wayfinder Beer, and they suggested basically the mentality used for like Helles and other traditional German beers is going to be the opposite of what you typically do for IPAs, which, you know, the hop bursting techniques you do for IPAs, you add all these layered hops in toward the end of the boil, at flame out, in the whirlpool. So that to me says to keep most of the hops early in the boil. So maybe if I did it again, I'd maybe not add additions at 10 and 0 minutes. I'd probably just maybe throw it in at 30 minutes or something like that. Okay. So those are the hops. Now, when it comes to water, just used bottled water. So, you know, I used a lot of distilled water. I mixed in with some spring water as well. So a lot of people think for Pilsner style beers, you want super, super soft water. And that's true when you're making a Bohemian or Czech style lager. But in Germany, as you go further north, they usually have a little bit harder water. So German pils are a little bit hoppier, a little bit more bitter than their counterparts. So you want a little bit more hardness in your water. So the water profile that I shot for was, you can see it here, 50 calcium, magnesium doesn't really matter, salt doesn't really matter, Cl 50, sulfates 80, somewhere around there. I'm not an expert by any means. You can do your own research, but those were kind of my targets. So in order to achieve those targets, I added a little bit of calcium chloride, about 2.25 grams, 1.25 grams of gypsum, and we mashed in with 4.48 gallons. The strike water temperature was 128, so it was a little bit lower than that once we mixed everything together. And this allowed us to do essentially like a little bit of a mini acid rest, because the pH that you're going to get from the Pilsner malts is going to be relatively high. So, and I experienced that as well. So around 6% or so, or excuse me, not 6%, about 6.1, something like that, even after using this little mini acid rest. So that acid rest was about 20 minutes. I did it on a RIMS tube. So then I heated to about mashed for the remaining about 60 minutes at 150 degrees. So we kind of hit all those different conversions in between there as it got to that temperature. So, you know, we got like a little mini protein rest in there as well. After that was done for about an hour, or actually once we hit the 150 mark, we took a pH reading. It was about 6.1. So that's too high. We want to be somewhere between 5.2, 5.6 to get proper conversion. So added some lactic acid. So added about 3 milliliters of lactic acid in order to get down to that range where we wanted, to get a good conversion. Then after that hour went by, we did a sparge of about 4 gallons of water at 168 degrees to collect our boil volume of about 7.5 gallons, because we're going to have a significant boil off plus a little bit of kettle loss as well. All right, so the fermenter that I use is a Fermentasaurus, and this allows us to ferment under pressure. So we did do that. We did that about 10 psi, and remember the Kveik yeast likes it to be warm. So we fermented. It started off about 90 because we got a little bit of temperature loss, and then we ramped it up to about 95 degrees. And this absolutely fermented super fast. So this Kveik is no joke. You know, as you can see on here, this is the integration with the tilt hydrometer you can see. And realistically, this was done fermenting after about 3 days. So it went all the way from 1048, 1047, 1048, somewhere around there, all the way down to 1007, 1008 in about 3 days. Just let it sit an additional 3 days or so, or excuse me, an additional about 24 hours or so, just to let it clean up things in there. So the final gravity is a little bit lower than probably is traditional for this style. So our alcohol is a little bit higher at 5.4%, but hey, a little bit extra alcohol, not going to complain. Traditionally, it's usually under a 5% beer, but this works for us. So at that point, we cold crashed for about 24 hours prior to kegging. And then I kegged with about 4 grams of gelatin just to clarify this beer. Wasn't sure if it was going to clear up, but initially, after a few days of pressure carbonating at about 20 psi, then we dropped the psi to 12, basically serving pressure after a few days, and we tried the beer out. And it was very cloudy or hazy initially, even after, pouring off the first pint or so of the droppings from the gelatin. But over time, it really cleared up. So we're going to throw up some images that show how much clearer it was about a week or so later. And then we'll get into some tasting notes. So how did this beer turn out? Reasonably cleared up. Aroma, smells a little spicy, a little woody, earthy. And it's pretty clean tasting. It's got some bitterness to it. There's just some particular flavor I can't exactly pick out that seems just a little bit off to me. I don't usually drink a whole lot of German Pill style beers. I like IPAs generally, Saisons, New England style IPAs, stouts. Don't drink a whole lot of Pilsner, so definitely not a Pilsner expert by any means. But there's like an extra roasty, extra earthy characteristic to it, and that might be adding those noble hops toward the end of the boil. That might be one thing. There was also some very minor scorching on my rims tube that might contribute to that flavor. Maybe some of it is the victory malt. So all those things maybe contribute to it. But other than that, it's, I wouldn't say it's a traditional German Pils beer, but it's definitely German Pils-esque. It's highly drinkable, and this is definitely not the first time that tasting it on the camera, but just this is when I had the opportunity to make the video. And I would totally make the style again. So I've drank plenty of this. It's great when it's warm out. It's entirely drinkable, crushable. There's just this extra woody, bitter, toasty note to it that I don't usually get in some of the other commercial Pilsners that I've had. So who knows? That's why I would say I would probably change up a few things in the future. Like I said, I'd probably just nix the get rid of the victory malt next time, and I would probably not do late additions of the noble hops. That way I can just eliminate those specific things to hone in on maybe trying to get to more of that cleaner flavor. The bitterness is there. It's definitely interesting to drink. It's not a boring beer by any means. Some people think lagers are boring. They don't really have great flavor or whatever. And that might be true with some of the macro brew American ones, but there's definitely good German traditional lagers out there. So, get out there and try a style that you don't normally get a chance to have, and you might find something that you like.